Hello and welcome to another episode of Lexitecture, a podcast about words by word nerds and for you. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I will be talking about our two favorite words of the week, looking at their origins and history, and generally chatting about how they got to where they are today. If that sounds like your cup of tea, come along for the ride and let's explore the weird and wonderful world of the English language. Quick note to our listeners today. This episode contains some language and subject matter that some people might not be comfortable with. Today's episode, Fanny Snob.
So, I looked up the word fanny because I wanted to know where it came from. And the OED has this to say. Fanny, noun, a woman's genitals. And then underneath origin, it also has informal, a person's buttocks. More on that in a moment. And then it uses three wonderful words. It says late 19th century, pretty good, but the three wonderful words of unknown origin.
Oh, that's...
So, of course, my little face just lit up at the news of unknown origin. And I did a little bit of digging to discover, since the origin is unknown, well, you know, what theories are there, what's going on around about it. And I found out some interesting stuff. So, before I get started with that, I do have to clarify that, as I mentioned, being on the British side of the Atlantic, fanny in this part of the world means vagina. It means a woman's genitals, just as the Oxford English Dictionary said so.
Yeah, not over here.
And in your part of the world, fanny means your bum.
Yes.
Your backside. And this, of course, leads to all sorts of very, very childish hilarity when people talk about things like fanny packs and sitting on your fanny and things like that.
Right.
The other almost endless source of humour with the word fanny comes from the fact that it is, of course, a female name. And if you look at if you look it up, I just looked it up online, I can't remember exactly where I was, but the first thing it says is that it's a diminutive of Frances or Francois or Stephanie or various other female names that are very, very common. And what this means is that if you are incredibly childish, as I would probably say I am,
right,
looking through old public records, graveyards, any of these places, you will find an abundance of fannies. Now, yeah, it doesn't ever stop being funny. I'm never ever going to stop laughing at that. It
shouldn't be funny. I'm 36 years old. I should be above this, but
no, I am not above this. So I also just wanted to kind of clarify that in the whole minefield of words that refer to so-called rude bits, which is itself a really, really fascinating field of etymology and of sociolinguistics, fanny is definitely on the sort of milder end of the scale.
Yes, 100%.
So, for example, Iron Brew, that great Scottish soft drink, which has become less great recently, but that's another matter. Iron Brew runs really, really fantastic adverts. They have great advertising campaigns that they're quintessentially Scottish in their humour and their presentation. And they had one a couple of years ago, which was, I forget the kind of overall message of the campaign. Iron Brew is great, something like that. But the advert was set in a hospital, and there was a set of proud parents and a new baby. And they want someone in the sort of sketch wants to call the baby Fanny because it said they come from a long line of Fannies. And of course, to the average childish-minded Scot, this is hilarious. Coming from a long line of Fannies, because it also, in Scotland particularly, you will call someone a Fanny. And what that means in that particular context is someone who is unspeakably silly. And not funny silly, just not very clever, really, really silly, pretty ridiculous, doing something that is not likely to turn out well. So
Adam Sandler at his worst.
that's a really, really great definition. What a fanny.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
And like so many other words for genitals that then take on slightly different meanings. So, you know, I personally recognise that the word cunt is hugely offensive in many sort of spheres, but I am not personally offended by it, either as a woman, as a member of civilised society. Again, it has a usage in Scots particularly that is not terribly offensive. So while
Okay.
it would cause my mother to blush to the roots of her hair and be absolutely mortified, particularly if she heard her daughter using such a word, I don't see it as that big a deal. But I still understand the relative strength of that word in, you know, an average conversation. I wouldn't break out at a dinner party.
Right.
But Fanny is almost like a childish, what you would say to a 5-year-old to say, what's that? Oh, it's just your fanny.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So, all of that notwithstanding, of unknown origin, that was where I got interested. And what I discovered is that it's generally considered to have come from the name of the heroine in the scandalous novel by John Cleland entitled Fanny Hill, or Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, which dates from 1748.
Huh.
So I had a little look at John Cleland's novel, scandalous novel. It's available on Project Gutenberg if you want to have a look at it yourself. And I then discovered, I just a Wikipedia Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, and I found this quite interesting because it's written in the Wikipedia page, and as I did a little bit more digging, found that this factoid is used very, very regularly in all sorts of kind of spheres of research. It says that Fanny Hill is an anglicisation of the Latin Mons Veneris, which means mound of Venus. So, you know, the mound of Venus as in the pubic mound.
Yeah.
So Fanny Hill, obviously Mons as in mountain, hill. And then I thought, well, Veneris, you know, there's almost a kind of a case for saying, okay. And then I thought, well, do Fanny and Veneris have any other links? So I couldn't find any particular links between this. However, it's said over and over again in all sorts of places that Fanny Hill translates to Mons Veneris, and thus here's your kind of etymological link as to why the name Fanny has come to signify genitalia. However, I then found a really, really interesting essay called Fanny Hill, Lord Fanny, and the Myth of Metonymy by Patrick Spedding and James Lambert on researchgate.net. And essentially what these two gentlemen seek to do is they seek to completely debunk the notion that the term fanny, meaning genitalia, comes from this text. And in much greater detail and in much more sort of learned terms than I could express here right now without just reading what they say, they talk about the fact that while, yes, the book is rude and it features anal sex, it features nudity, it features prostitution, it was a scandalous text in its day, there's not really any particular content in the book to indicate that when the author John Cleland uses the word fanny, he's using it as a sort of a pun or a metonym for vagina. So they talk about the various citations and where this word first appeared in dictionaries with the meaning that we use today. However, one of the things that I found most interesting from this article is the notion that essentially prostitutes were, generally speaking, lower class women. And thus, the names of, sort of common names of lower class women came to be synonymous with prostitutes in some cases. So, this is what's said. It is likely that Cleland's infamous novel was at least partly responsible for this transformation and for the continuing use of the word. However, it was common for the familiar form of very common female names, particularly common working class names, to come to mean 1. A maidservant, 2. A slattern, as maids and working class women were generally conceived to be, 3. A slut or promiscuous woman, as maids and working class women were often conceived to be, and 4. A prostitute, since many prostitutes were poor working class women. As a result, through metonymy, common female names, especially common forms of common names, came to signify the vagina. In the 1890s, Farmer and Henley record Black Bess from Elizabeth, Itching Jenny, Jennifer, Kitty from Catherine, Madge from Margaret, as well as Lady Jane, Mary Jane, and of course Fanny. Exactly the same semantic process occurred for the penis, resulting in Dick, Richard, Hanging Johnny, John, Little Davy, David, etc. Consequently, it is not at all clear that Fanny joined Madge on account of Cleland's novel alone. And what I find interesting about this is this name that has caused so many people so many occasions to giggle has come to mean genitals almost by accident. And so I feel particularly sorry for all of the Fannies still out there, when in fact the reason that Fanny stuck as the word meaning vagina there doesn't seem to be any sense behind it. It could just as easily be the name Jenny that we all giggle at childishly like school children pointing at something rude. It could easily be the name Amy, I suppose. Unfortunately, that burden has fallen on the Fannies.
On the Fannies of the world.
And that is what I found so particularly interesting about this word. I thought, okay, hey Roger, what do you say? I'll look up Fanny. Fanny seems to have been a little bit too vulgar for Roger's terms, and it's not found in the alphabetical index at the end of at the back of the book. It is, however, included in the section that deals with genitalia. So instead, I looked up vagina and found that there's a section wherein genitalia and words for genitalia are contained, and it's there marked as informal. So I presume that its informal or slang status means that it doesn't get its own indexed entry.
Right.
Which I found quite interesting. So,
Yes.
Tell me about your word.
So my word for today is snob. SNOB. I'm assuming this is a transatlantic word?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Okay, super. So snob in sort of common parlance now just mainly refers to, someone who just thinks they're better than everyone, fancies themselves an expert in a field, so like a wine snob or a beer snob.
Sure.
And particularly someone who looks down on other people for not knowing the same level as them. Sort of a John Cusack and Jack Black in High Fidelity are the ultimate music snobs. And delightfully so, but still snobbish nonetheless. So a while ago, I was wondering about this word because it's kind of it's a weird word. Snob. It has a weird sound to it. It
tastes funny in your mouth.
Exactly. It's got a weird mouthfeel, if that's possible for a word, which it is, apparently, as it turns out.
Really?
He says, using a very wine snobbish term.
If mouthfeel for words does exist, then I would like to point out that the word mouthfeel has a terrible mouthfeel.
It does.
I hate myself when I say it.
It's very and you should. You are right to.
Pray continue.
Let's get us out of this weird tangent. So of course I went to the OED and I looked up snob, and it dates back to 1785 in a work that I'm going to just have to find on its own because I keep finding it as the first instance of a lot of these words that I'm looking up.
Okay.
It's by a presumably gentleman by the name of F. Gross, Grose. And it's the Classical Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue. So I think it's kind of cool because it clearly means that this is an older word, but this is just the first time someone's bothered to write it down.
Absolutely.
Under etymology, it has originally slang, comma, of obscure origin, which is almost as good as of unknown
exciting.
origin. But it originally was a cobbler or a shoemaker.
No.
And so snob just meant a cobbler or a shoemaker,
Wow.
which instantly piqued my interest beyond all reason. Like, how did we get from A to B on this one?
I think
This
too
is
that
crazy.
snob has an odd mouthfeel, but cobbler is entirely delightful.
Cobbler is, and not just because it's delicious as an actual dessert.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that context. Yeah, we don't have cobbler very much here, but yeah,
Oh, you should
delicious
have it more.
both.
It's fantastic.
Delicious both in sound and in taste.
So if you were a cobbler snob, you'd be ridiculous and ridiculously redundant as well. So that's just crazy talk.
Wow.
So yeah, so it started out as a just a nickname for a shoemaker, and then it seems to have sort of gone through this bizarre kind of morphing because later on in the early 19th century, it seems that apparently, particularly around Cambridge University, it was a town used for just the townies, the non-educated, the lower classes who were
Okay.
just the guys who shone the shoes of the university
The scholars.
types.
Wow.
So they would call the townsmen snobs, and it says almost an American use. So I think it's both Cambridges. I
Okay.
think it doesn't matter if you're in Massachusetts or England. You're equally likely to look down on the lower classes of townies. And
But
then,
make sure that they keep your shoes shiny.
exactly. And then sort of as you got closer to the middle of the 19th century, it just became in common parlance as a person belonging to the ordinary or lower social class. So just someone who's got no
Wow.
pretensions of rank, has got no claim on the gentility. It's just a normal person.
This is incredible.
Which then, as you went along even further, it became an actively disparaging term. So just a vulgar person who is. So the OED goes from a person belonging to the ordinary or lower social class to a person who has little or no breeding or good taste, a vulgar or ostentatious person.
Okay.
So it's starting to become a little bit more towards the vulgarity and ostentatiousness. And then as you move through the second half of the 19th century, sort of 1848, 1860 and onwards, it then becomes those people of the quote-unquote lower classes who fancy themselves the person to ingratiate themselves into the upper classes.
Okay.
So it's the person who admires or always seeks out the highest class parties to go to and then tell everyone that they've been to them and they've hobnobbed with the rich and famous and all the rest. And then from there it went to, because of course no person has more disdain for a particular group of people than a member of that group who aspires
Absolutely.
or tricks themselves into thinking that they're something else.
Yeah, sure.
So the people who are most likely to be waving money around are the new money who have recently left the middle classes. Like a middle class person who comes into a lot of wealth is probably much more likely to buy the ridiculously flashy car.
Yeah. Yeah, so that whole nouveau riche vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it went from, and then that's basically how it goes now. It's sort of, that was the early 20th century is when it started getting into that level of meaning, the particular disdain for the lower classes. And then that's sort of where it stuck. And then now it has kind of become anyone who, regardless of their own class, looks down on people lower down on the societal rungs from them.
I was very interested when I looked up snob in Roger to find how many words we have for the kind of social niceties of being a human being and how complicated society is. You know, I think that the complication is reflected in the number of sections of Roger that talk about, you know, there is a section on vulgarity, there is a section on pompousness, there is all these different ways that we can be as people, either relating to sort of social and financial class, if you like, background, that sort of thing. But also so many ways to behave, so many labels for the ways that people behave, so many different contexts and woven together meanings and potentials for misunderstandings within the field of human behaviour. It's very interesting.
And that's it for this episode of Lexitecture. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed what you heard, please give us a rating and review on iTunes, and be sure to tell all your word nerd friends about us too. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter by searching Lexitecture, Lexitecture. And if you'd like to get in touch with us about the things we talked about in this episode, you can send us an email at words@lexitecture.com. Special thanks to the Joy Drops for our theme music, and we'll talk to you again next week.